Well, let's talk to someone who is very much been at the forefront of those trying to campaign for us to get out of lockdown. It's Dr. John Lee. He's a former NHS consultant in pathology. He's also now the lead pathologist at HART, that's Health Action and Recovery Team, an organisation I very much endorse people actually following. They are all about providing a really sort of a wide range of scientific and medical and other opinion on terms of what the costs and the benefits of any given policy we're dealing with COVID actually are. And I'm delighted to say John Lee joins us right now. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
You've written a piece in the Mail today, and you've been speaking out repeatedly, including on this show, throughout the pandemic and throughout the lockdown, about how we have to get out of this. Do you share Andre's and mine's concerns that every time we do hit some sort of close to the goalposts where we are going to be coming out of lockdown restrictions, like, the massively fantastic rollout of discovery of a vaccine, then the massive successful rollout of the vaccine, and then cases coming down and admissions going down to hospital and deaths going down, that the goalposts keep getting moved?
Yes, I absolutely do share your concern. I think it's extremely worrying. I think what we've been in for the last year really is government struggling to deal with something that it doesn't know very much about. And so it's been very, very dependent on the advice it's been getting from its SAGE committee. And the SAGE committee, I'm afraid, has been reflecting a very narrow interpretation of the data, and in many of our views, a rather tendentious interpretation of the data. And so the government really haven't had much option but to act on the advice they've been given. But there is actually good understanding of what you do in a situation where there's great uncertainty, and that is you broaden the debate, you broaden the range of advice you're receiving so that you can actually see the range of possible interpretations of the data, and then you as a politician can come to the right idea. And that's what the government hasn't been really doing enough, in my opinion, hitherto, and they could make their own lives a lot easier by broadening the debate and letting other people contribute.
Yeah, and this is it. We're constantly told by people who support lockdown, or whether it's government or members of the public, but the government has to listen to the science, and the science says, well, for a start, it's not cap T, cap S. There is no the science. There is lots of scientific debate. We're told, well, it's a minority of medics and scientists like you who are questioning what SAGE and NervTech and all the others are saying. But we don't know, because we know huge numbers of people who are experts in these fields. When they do speak out, they're subject to abuse, like of Carl Hennigan, Jonianidis from Stanford University, and you, indeed, many others, all have been subject to horrific personal abuse and attacks for actually speaking out and speaking your mind. Many other academics too fearful to come forward. But I mean, I speak to them off air. I know you speak to them on HART, and your organisation HART as well, who are concerned that actually the data is being wrongly interpreted. We see computer model after computer model, whether it's Warwick University or whether it's Imperial College, showing the absolute devastation of us coming out of lockdown, all based on some really dodgy assumptions like no seasonality, or taking no account of the fact that we've got a vaccine rollout that's providing not just safety but also perhaps immunity as well. When the government listens to all these people and doesn't listen to the alternatives, is there any hope that we will actually walk away from this and actually start balancing the costs and the very real known 100% we know costs of lockdown against the possibilities of a resurgence of the virus?
Well, no, I mean, I think we do need a change of approach. I mean, it does seem to me that there's a contradiction at the moment inherent in the government's approach. And that's, on the one hand, they're telling us that this virus is unprecedented and we've never come across anything like this before. But on the other hand, they're telling us that despite that, SAGE, the small group of people on SAGE with their relatively narrow specialist interest and expertise, know precisely and exactly how we should deal with it. Well, obviously, those two things are not compatible. I and many others, and I agree with you, I think there are very many people who have serious reservations about the approach we're going. I and many others feel that this isn't, in fact, unprecedented, that, in fact, we quite regularly come across viruses of a similar type of nastiness to COVID, but we've never dealt with them in this way before. And if you accept the fact that this virus isn't unprecedented, then we do know what to do about it. And what we do about it is not this.
Yes.
What we do about it is what we've done every year previous to 2020, which is not sort of shoot ourselves in both feet in an attempt to deal with something that we don't really understand what we're dealing with.
Well, indeed, and that's the thing. Until 2020, World Health Organization advice on dealing with pandemics was not to lock down, was not to close borders, was not to effectively lock down an entire population of healthy people to protect those who are most at risk. I mean, this is all going against what was until this pandemic official World Health Organization policy, and against what is still a lot of World Health Organization official policy.
I mean, lockdown was never seriously considered as a medical intervention before it was suddenly done. It was suddenly done on the basis of panic, and it's never a good idea to do
The
anything
Sage
on
Minutes,
the
the
basis of
Sage
panic.
Minutes ahead of March, they were not actually discussing lockdown as a serious issue. The Sage Minutes have been published, and we know that they had ruled that out as a ludicrous possibility very early on.
That's right. I mean, it's never been seriously considered before it was done, which means that the costs and benefits of it weren't seriously considered before it was done. And what's absolutely clear, and I'm sure absolutely nobody will disagree with, is the fact that lockdowns have serious costs. I mean, these are not neutral policies. They massively affect the health and the quality of life of everybody, but in particular some people, in terms of their not being able to access medical care, or in terms of their mental health, or in terms of their mental health becoming so severely affected that they actually end their own lives. Lockdown causes deaths. I mean, there's no two ways about it. If you isolate old people, if you admit them to hospital and refuse to let their relatives, for example, come anywhere near them so that they can't have an advocate for it, they will not get the treatment that they would otherwise get. You can't treat people in isolation. And so actually lockdowns not only are massively affecting quality of life, which is an important part of any medical decision, but it's actually killing people. And when the dust settles all this, we look at the numbers, it's going to have had a massive effect on a lot of people. So we shouldn't be doing this lightly, and we shouldn't be prolonging it unless there's good reason to prolong it. And it seems to me incomprehensible that, having had a very successful vaccine program, I mean, this country has shown positively what it can do on two situations, it seems to me. The Nightingale hospitals, which we built, but then unfortunately didn't follow through on, and the vaccine, which we've introduced extremely well, but looks like we might be in danger of not following through on. And I think there's a pattern there, and we need to seriously examine it.
Well, indeed. And this is the issue where we're told, well, mass rapid testing is the route out. We'll get down, according to the Telegraph, their briefings, they've been told that the government wants to get down to, we've got currently 10,000 cases a day. And we're seeing cases absolutely plummeting from the peak in January. Hospital admissions, people on mechanical ventilators and ICU, and deaths plummeting. Still too high, completely acceptable. No one wants anyone to die of anything. But, you're a pathologist. People die of something, and very sadly, an awful lot of the people who are dying of COVID are people, average age is 82. The younger people who are dying, the vast majority of those have serious, and not just they once had asthma, they have serious underlying health conditions. 48% of those in ICU who are under 70 have a BMI over 30, 11% of over 40. I mean, there are lots of other things why these people are dying very, very tragically. But this policy of lockdown continuing until we're under 1,000 cases a day. But we're going to get out of it with rapid flow testing. Now, the lowest false positive rate in the world would still, even if we had no COVID at all, mean that we had 4,000 or 5,000 cases every single day, no matter what. Even if there was no COVID left at all, in which case we're never coming out of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the troubles with COVID is that it's a disease that's not clinically diagnosable. So you can't go into a ward and examine a patient and say you've got COVID and you haven't got COVID, because the symptoms overlap with other respiratory infections, and in fact the symptoms may even be absent. So you can't diagnose COVID clinically. And there are two things that have been confused during this epidemic. One is that a positive test equals a COVID case, which is simply not true. That's never been a way that we've diagnosed any disease previously. And the second thing is that dying with COVID equals dying because of COVID. The government itself admitted back last May that those weren't the same thing. But of course, in the 100,000 figure that's now been bandied around as given fact, they've elided those two things and they've equated them. So both of those things are incorrect, and they give an exaggerated view of how serious and
but the ONS, the Austrian National Statistics, says that I think certainly more than 90% of those who have died after a positive test for COVID did die with COVID on their death certificate as an underlying cause at the very least, or one of the main reasons they died.
Yeah, but the problem with that is, of course, that back last February, COVID was made a notifiable disease. So obviously people always record COVID because you have to. The thing is, you don't have to record it on the death certificate, as a matter of fact. You have to notify it to the relevant government department. But the thing is, when a disease is notifiable, there's obviously a strong subliminal pressure on doctors to put it down anyway, just in case, so that nobody can accuse you of not. So it seems to me highly likely that the emphasis on this has made COVID, has been recorded as a cause of death more than it would be. With the testing, the fact that you can't diagnose it clinically means we're totally reliant on tests of various kinds to diagnose the disease. And that means we have to know that the tests are measuring what we think they're measuring. And, well, as you say, I mean, So if you do 1 million tests a day and you had a false positive rate of 1%, which is actually quite a low false positive rate for any test, you would have 10,000 cases a day. And the fact is, when you're trying to do mass testing, obviously, by definition, you have a lot of people doing the tests who are not specially trained, who are not particularly aware of what's going on in the test.
Exactly.
And so, naturally enough, the false positives and the false negatives are higher than you would in a totally controlled lab environment. But even in a totally controlled lab environment, you can never make any test 100% positive. And although 1% sounds like a small number, as you say, if you multiply 1% by a very big number of tests, you will end up with what looks like quite a frightening number of positives, even if there's no disease at all.
Yeah. Dr. John Lee, thank you so much for joining us. He's former NHS consultant in pathology. He's also the lead pathologist at HART, that's the Health Action Recovery Team. Really appreciate you joining us.